Hey everybody, my name's Nick. I'm the guy behind the Fractals that a lot of you are using and hopefully having a lot of fun with. Today what we're going to talk about is doing the post-processing on the images created using the Pascal fractal filter. This is probably one of my favorite fractal filters. You can just do a lot of crazy distortion and light bending effects with this filter, but it can be a little bit harder to use just because it's fatter. Sometimes you end up getting a little bit too much distortion. So being able to touch those photos up appropriately with your favorite post-processing tool is important to getting results that you like. So I'm going to go through and tell you exactly what I do to get good results in post-processing, and hopefully you can take that and apply it to your own photos and be able to get awesome shots that you can share with your community and your viewers and your clients. So let's get started. Alright, we're just gonna get right into it. So this is a shoot that we did in New York. We have this lovely young model right here. She's standing in front of I believe it was a retail building with some lights in the front right here. And so these shots were all taken using the Pascal fractal filter. You can see we have some awesome looking light distortions around her, so that's really the benefit of using this filter. You have to be careful because sometimes you get the distortions in areas you don't want, so you have to be mindful of that. But after looking through these shots, we can see that in some ways we don't have exactly the clarity around her that we want. Here we're missing a little bit of clarity, especially right here. But overall, I think the composition of this shot's really good. The effect down here is pretty cool. So we're just going to go ahead and start editing this one. So the first things that I notice when I'm editing a photo like this is what exactly do I want to highlight and what do I want to have just fade away into the background more so. The first thing I'm noticing with this photo is that this area is a little bit overexposed relative to my subject, and yeah, so my subject is not probably as bright as I want her to be, and she has this ambient yellow tint around her, which I'm gonna want to fix a little bit. So the first things I do is notice that, so those are things that we're gonna fix, but there are just a few precursors to working on that. One of which is fixing the image's crop. So that's always where I start. I think we have a little bit too much dead space on this right hand side and this top hand side. So we're just gonna go and crop these a little bit. And we're basically just gonna apply the rule of thirds to get her right here in a corner of the frame that brings more attention to her. I think this is already a much more appropriate crop. And then we're basically just going to go through all of these settings and see which ones look good. So by default, I think Lightroom applies the camera applies too much of what Lightroom considers clarity. So I typically always just tune these down using the tone curve. I might go with a value like this because now there's just less detail in the areas of the frame that we don't want. Also, dehaze, which is this newer option in Lightroom, also lets us bring more detail out of those areas that we don't want, which I think is just adding to a softer touch overall to the image, which in my opinion looks better. Overall, I think this image is lacking a little bit of saturation. So I'm just going to pull this vibrance up quite a bit probably. Let's go a little bit. I'm usually a little heavy-handed here, but now we have a little bit more color. I think this looks better. And also I think we could use more shadows because there's a lot of detail that we're missing in areas like these. So let's pull this up. Alright, so now we have a lot of detail everywhere. It probably looks like too much, but I think this is at a good starting spot. And the exposure overall looks pretty good, but we just want to overcompensate usually in the beginning, so I'm going to go a little bit heavier on the exposure and pull the contrast down a little bit. So now a lot of these tones are a lot more even right now. The image, obviously, we have way too much exposure right here, but we're just going to keep going through and evening out these tones to get something that is a little bit easier to work with. Usually when I get to the tone curve, I pull the lowest level of the tone curve up quite a bit, just because I feel like the blackest blacks add a little bit too much contrast to our image, and I just want to get rid of them. But I do want to add a lot of saturation using the tone curve, so I'll usually go a little bit heavier right here. And so now you can see we have quite a lot more contrast here, but I'll usually pull that contrast back up on the lighter tones in the image. So now we have quite a bit more contrast, but we have it in the areas that we want it. We have some good contrast right here. Not that much. Alright, oops. These can be a little harder to pull. Cool. So we have good focus on her now. This is a little bit oversaturated, but we can still work with it. The HSL curve, or the HSL sliders, are a lot of fun because, for example, in this image we have a lot of yellows, but what I found after just working with these kind of things for a while is that yellow is just not the most attractive color for these kind of images. What we want is a lot more of a range in hues. So we could take our yellows and pull a lot of oranges and like reds out of them. So that's what we're going to want to do here. We can do that using these sliders. Typically I'll take these yellows, and I found that adding a lot of orange helps. You can see how adding orange in these parts of the frame right here bring a lot of color out. Now they're just more multivariate as compared to before. That might be a little bit too much, but let's do it on that curve and this one as well. So we can see now this area we have more definition here. It's a lot more attractive in comparison to this yellow. You might not want to go that hard, but we can try something like this. Cool. This color is looking better over here and here. I like that more. For split toning, I don't have any great rules of thumb, but I'll typically just play with these and see if I can get something that looks a little bit better. We can add a little bit of like red right here, but we could just reserve this for later as well. As far as detail goes, I'm using an older camera, 5D Mark II, so the detail's not great. You probably want to fix that up a little bit. Sharpening. This probably has more to do with your camera and your lens, so just do whatever feels best here. These I typically always check just to correct for aberrations that you have in the lens, as well as aberrations that you have as a result of using a wider angle. So this will correct for those distortions. Any image that has a subject, typically I'll apply some sort of vignetting just to add more attention to the subject and away from the corners. You can see that is just a huge improvement already. We're bringing a lot more attention to the center of the frame as opposed to the corners. And as far as calibration goes, there's no great rules of thumb here, but typically, I mean, in this image we're dealing with a lot of yellows and oranges, and I found that playing with purples can kind of, yeah, adding purples to those areas just brings those colors out even more. We kind of just want to get away from that yellow overtone that we had previous and add something that's more orange and has a little bit more of a flare to it, so that's what I'm going to do there. Cool. Alright, right now you're probably thinking this image looks terrible, and I agree with you, it does, but it takes a little bit to get there. So now we're going to do what I consider to be the most important parts of the post-processing on the image. Let's bring the contrast down a little bit more, which is using the graduated filter as well as the adjustment brush. So the graduated filter is going to be super important in this image because we have just way too much exposure over here, and we basically just want to apply a more uniform exposure to the entire image. So the graduated filter is going to allow us to do that. We're just going to select all of this area over here, and we're going to bring the exposure down by quite a bit. If we bring the exposure down, it's going to bring all of the tones down uniformly, but if we bring the highlights down, it'll just bring those brighter areas down. So we just want to bring, we probably want to do a mix of both. Probably this entire area is just too bright, but the highlights especially are more overbearing, so let's focus on getting a lot of these highlights out. So now we can see, in comparison to before, we're able to pull a lot more detail out of this left-hand side of the image, and it's also not as distracting as it once was. So, that's looking better. Let's keep it like that. Right now the red is just going crazy in this image, but I do like the mix of tones overall. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to increase the luminance on the red. If we do that, we can see these reds are just starting to be pulled up a little bit. And so they're not as sharp as they once were. Alright, here's the super important part. This is the adjustment brush. So right now she's just totally in line with the colors of the background, but that's not what we want. What we want is for a more natural ambient light to be cast on her face, and the environment is not always going to give us that, so what we're often going to have to do is do it in post-processing here. So I'm going to go ahead and just select her completely. You can see here that she has been totally selected, and I'm going to go ahead and start fixing the color on her. The first thing I'm going to do is change the color temperature on her, which is just, it's obviously way out of whack. But you can see there already, once we start changing these colors, she starts looking a lot more normal compared to the background. This is obviously way too much blue. But as we keep messing with this, we'll start to get what we want. We also, I think, want more contrast on her. So I'm just gonna apply a little bit more whites, a little bit more shadows. And probably remove some of this clarity. We still have a little bit too much in my opinion. We just have way too much purple here. Yo. Alright, next we're going to use the HSL slider here to change the background or the tone of her. I think there's just a little bit too much yellow still, so we want to get rid of that. Cool, so that's looking a lot more natural than it was. You can see here's before, here's after. Still, the color is still looking a little bit odd. So we're gonna pull this up and pull this down. And then maybe go and... Alright, so this is looking a lot better, but let's just keep mixing the color so that we get to a spot where we want. She's still looking way too red. Might want to add some more orange tones, some more yellow tones. But as you can see, this background is already, the color here is looking pretty nice. We just have to keep fixing the color on her, so I'm just gonna keep adding blue to offset this red that we have currently. Let's see, this is a little too much. Picking a good color here is super important to fixing whatever ambient light we currently have in the picture. Cool. That's starting to look a lot better right now. Let's make sure that this brush is totally covering the areas that we're interested in. And I'm just going to keep adding a little bit more contrast. She's looking a little bit blue relative to what I'd like. I think the hue of this color is good, but we don't want exactly that much saturation. And we just want to expose her a little bit more. Alright, that's looking better. Her cheek is now just a little bit overexposed, so we're also going to want to fix that. So let's go here, bring those highlights down. Maybe bring the exposure in this area down a little bit. Alright, nice. This is looking a lot better. Let's make sure. So still the red here is a little bit much for my taste. What we want here really is just a natural looking light. We basically want a neutral color temperature. So we have to use this hue slider in combination with the ambient light in the scene to get a color that looks good. And sometimes that takes a little bit of just playing around with that slider, finding color that works. That's pretty close. Cool. Alright. I think that looks a lot better. Let's see if playing with any of these tints fixes anything. That obviously adds too much. You might want to add a little bit of green. A little bit of green is cool. Alright, so now if we look at before and after, she was obviously super red, and now we have a color that looks a lot more natural. So this is the image before, and this is after doing some quick post-processing. You can keep messing with these sliders more to get more of an effect of what you want, but right now I feel like this is looking pretty good. I might increase the color temperature on her just a little bit and bring these whites down, and that's looking pretty good. This area could use a little bit touching up. Overall, I think maybe there's a little bit too much contrast right here. Alright, so that's basically it. I'm somewhat happy, or I'm pretty happy with the way this looks. You could keep messing with that, with the adjustment brush hue sliders to get this color on her a little bit more natural looking, and to get the background a little bit darker relative to the subject. We could try that right now real quick. But I think this looks pretty good. So that's basically what I do for post-processing on these types of images. And yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and post this on Instagram. let me know what you think. If you would, if this helps you do better post-processing with your Pascal filter, and if you would like to see more videos like this for other photos, feel free to submit photos that you've taken, and I'd be happy to go through them, process them like this, and maybe even make a video to show others how I did it, so that we can create better photos together. So that's it. Thank you for watching, and let me know what you thought. Bye.